Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Thank you. Sir, Professor Kalidas Shetty. Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
Kalidas Shetty, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm here. On.
Yeah. It's a very good evening, sir.
Morning. Yeah. Morning.
Morning. Yeah. Morning to you. Okay. Sir, shall we start?
Sure.
Good evening to all. I am Kishore Kumar CK, Director of Physical Education, Mangalore University. I'm really privileged to welcome you all on behalf of Department of Physical Education to the international webinar on nutrition and health. The Department of Physical Education has always stood by the value system of physical activity and appropriate diet for fitness. I hope this webinar will induce healthy dietary habits in us and certainly would help to maintain our physical and mental health. May I now request Mr. Mangalore University Joint Organizing Secretary, formerly hockey player and qualified hockey coach, to welcome the guests and participants to this international webinar. Over to Mr. Ramesh HN.
Good evening all. Department of Physical Education, Mangalore University welcomes you to the international webinar on nutrition and health. Today we have with us Honorable Vice Chancellor of Mangalore University, Professor P. Subramania Edapatitaya. It's my privilege to welcome the respectful Vice Chancellor of our university, an internationally renowned scholar in the field of commerce and management, who has great interest towards the development of sports in our university. He is instrumental in providing good facilities and scholarship to our university sports persons. He is also the brain and strength behind in implementing new sports programs in our university. On behalf of the Department of Physical Education, I extend a hearty welcome to you, sir. Today we have eminent scientist Professor Kalidas Shetty, PhD, MS, founding director of Global Institute of Food Security and International Agriculture, professor of plant science and associate vice president for international partnerships and collaborations, North Dakota State University, USA. On behalf of Mangalore University Physical Education Department, I extend a hearty welcome to you, sir. I humbly welcome Ms. Nidhi Pandey, Commissioner, KVS, Dr. Vijay Lakshmi, Additional Commissioner, KVS, to this program. I welcome our dynamic registrar, Sri Raju Mogavira, KS, members of the syndicate, Professor P.L. Dharma, Registrar Evaluation, Professor B. Narayan, Finance Officer of Mangalore University. I also welcome Dr. Kishore Kumar CK, Director of Physical Education, my colleagues in the department, and esteemed participants of this webinar. Welcome you all once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ramesh. Now I'll take a moment to showcase about our department through this video.
ಕಿರಣ ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇನೆ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಬದುಕು ದಿನ ಪಾಠ ಪಠಣ ಗುರು ಬುದ್ಧಿ ವಚನ ಇದು ವಿದ್ಯಾದಾನ ತಾಣ ಪಡೆದಾಗಲೇನೆ ಸಿರಿ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಂಧಕಾರ ದಮನ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ಮಂಗಳೂರು ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾನಿಲಯ ನಮನ ನಮನ ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಬದುಕು ಜ್ಞಾನವೇ ಬೆಳಕು ಬೆಳಗೋಕೆ ಬದುಕು
May I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor P. Subramanya Edapaditaya, to give his opening remarks. Sir, please.
Greetings from Mangalore University. I am very happy to welcome you all to the international webinar on nutrition and health organized by the Department of Physical Education of our university. I wholeheartedly welcome the resource person of this webinar, Professor Kalidas Shetty, PhD MS from North Dakota State University, United States of America. The world is facing an unprecedented shock in the form of COVID-19. The theme of today's conference, nutrition and health, is more relevant now than ever before. The Department of Physical Education has always stood by the value systems of physical activity and appropriate diet for fitness. I am happy to note that they have aptly chosen nutrition and health as the topic for today's webinar. I hope this webinar will induce healthy dietary habits in all of us that will help to maintain our physical and mental health. The Department of Physical Education has been inspiring, encouraging, and guiding the sports persons in various ways for their accomplishment in the field of sports. Some of them being scholarship for upcoming sports persons up to ₹3 lakh every year, cash prizes for inter-university medalists, financial assistance for international participation, reservation of seat in each post-graduation department, re-examination to help the sports persons who would miss the examination due to their participation in university, national and international competitions, insurance policy to sports persons, and so on and so forth. We have sports policy to manage the university sports program, established various sports facilities, basketball, tennis, handball, and other playgrounds. We also have an indoor sports complex which is on par with the international standards, fitness center, and air-conditioned conference hall. We also have a highly sophisticated sports science laboratory with the physiological data acquisition system, wireless EMG system, and exercise physiology systems. These facilities enable the sports persons to enlighten themselves about their psychological and physiological conditions and also to take up research activities. With the planned programs and facilities available till date, we were able to produce world champions, Olympians, Arjuna awardees, Ekalavya awardees, Karnataka Krida Ratna awardees, and so on. Currently, as per Association of Indian Universities Sports Board, Mangalore University stands in the 6th position in sports performance among more than 800 universities in India and 1st position in South India. Further, in the recently conducted Khelo India University Games 2020, our university secured overall 5th position in India and 1st position in South India. The Department of Physical Education has already conducted 8 webinars since September 2020, and more than 14,000 people have registered from across the world for this webinar. More than 2,500 years ago, Hippocrates said, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." The COVID-19 pandemic is a leading challenge across the globe now. This pandemic has especially brought to the forefront the importance of food and nutrition. The pandemic is to strengthen the immune system. A proper and healthy diet can ensure a robust immune system that can resist any onslaught by the virus. A balanced diet with adequate nutrients and optimum physical activity are necessary for a healthy living. It is food that makes the body and exercise that shapes the body. In this context, I would like to cite a simple shloka from Vriddha Chanakya which goes like this: Deepo bhakshayate dvantam kajjalam cha.
Gentlemen, it is an honor and my privilege to introduce Professor Kalidas Shetty, Associate Vice President for International Partnerships and Collaborations and Professor, Plant Metabolism and Food Security, North Dakota State University, USA. Professor Shetty received his bachelor's in agricultural sciences from the University of Agricultural Sciences, Bengaluru, master's in bacteriology and PhD in microbiology from the University of Idaho, USA. Professor Shetty has 3 decades of professional experience in teaching and research. Professor Shetty's research interests focus on the critical role of cellular and metabolic basis of oxygen biology, advancing global food security and health in a sustainable environment. This focus is contributing to very innovative advances in the areas of crops for health, post-harvest biology, nutraceuticals, functional foods, malnutrition, and hunger challenges. He has developed an innovative Crops for Health research platform to counter diet-linked chronic diseases and for managing malnutrition challenges from maternal to child health needs globally. Professor Shetty's current
Thank you, madam. Friends, we have reached a much awaited moment to hear to the distinguished personality, Professor Kalidas Shetty. May I now request Professor Kalidas Shetty, an eminent scientist of international repute, to deliver the lecture on nutrition and health.
You have to allow me to share the screen.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All
Yes,
right.
sir. Yes, sir.
You can see my screen, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for the kind introduction. And as the Honorable Vice Chancellor happily said, let food be thy medicine. And as you know, your physical activity and food go hand in hand. And but before I give you the perspective on food, and nutrition and health, I want to give you a perspective on how our food system has some challenges and why it may not be providing good nutrition and health. So when we understand this, then we can better frame our nutrition and health towards well-being. And I like to, as in my slide, in the title, 2 key points that you should keep in mind as we go and try to understand how food advances nutrition and health is keeping our food diverse, and also how we tap into our local food system and our own traditional food system to provide this good nutrition and health. And I will provide you the scientific rationale or the metabolic rationale why this is so. But before I go into good nutrition and good health, let's look at our own food system globally, and how did we come to this, the kind of food that we eat, and what are the breakdown and challenges in this food system. So today, if you look at the global population, we are about 7.4 billion people. And surprisingly, with the current production focused on carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, minerals, and vitamins, which is what we term as macronutrients and micronutrients as the basis of food, we have enough calories and food for 12 billion people. And yet, we have food surplus, but yet 1 billion of us are going hungry every day, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. And so we still have hunger in the world that has its consequences in maternal and child nutrition and consequences of that. And so we have food insecurity from lack of macronutrients and micronutrients. India, by and large, has tried to solve those problems with the Green Revolution, where we focused on large-scale production to meet these needs. But what has happened surprisingly is there are parts of India and parts of the world where we have more macronutrients than we need to meet hunger. And that is the biggest burden that the world is facing. And more so, we are facing it in India, where we still have hunger problems. That is the first layer of problem. But still, we have a higher level of people going towards high macronutrient refined food diets. And the consequence of that is the rapid rise in type 2 diabetes and its consequences, which has inflammatory underpinnings, which has contributions to breakdown in immunity and other chronic diseases. So the biggest burden the world is facing today is not just the hunger issues for 1 billion people, but more rapidly growing excess calorie burden, which is resulting in preventable, non-communicable chronic diseases, and primarily seen in the diabetes epidemic, and which has consequences for immunity breakdown and inflammation-led breakdown towards cardiovascular disease, autoimmune diseases, and ultimately cognitive disease like Parkinson's and others as we age. And so now we need to address both these challenges as the population grows to 9 billion by 2050. And by the end of the century, about 10 to 12 billion. We may not reach 12 billion, but about 10 to 12 billion. So we still have enough calories for 12 billion, but the redistribution has to work. But more importantly, we have to address these issues in the midst of very rapidly changing climate. And therefore, we need to have food systems that are both climate resilient, plus also meet hunger needs, but also address this very major difficulty we are having, which may also, as we get more data, maybe some of the underlying issues where the immunity has failed as we face COVID. I'll come to this point a little later. And we are still gathering data why food may be one of the underlying issues where the breakdown in immunity may have occurred, particularly innate immunity. But we still have no data to say that as yet. And the fourth biggest challenge, especially in my institute, we are looking at is many of the antidotes, that is fruits and vegetables and high fiber foods that we are so much missing for preventing chronic diseases or even giving a balanced micronutrient needs. They are fruits and vegetables, and a lot of it we are wasting because of the perishability problem and distribution problem, cold storage issues. So there's a lot of value added conversions that are needed in terms of both preserving these high water containing foods, but also how do we add more value to it in order to then address both the micronutrient and other needs, as well as many of the antidotes that we may need for preventing chronic diseases. So a lot of the time, eating a very diverse diet, rich in fiber and having a higher dose of fruits and vegetables is one of the best preventable solutions for chronic diseases as well as overall hunger. And particularly in India specifically, a society that is rich in legumes diet and suddenly has gone to a wider ratio of carbohydrates to beans. And so this is a very big challenge in a very largely plant-eating diet. And in this, we are reducing our consumption of beans, legumes. And I will articulate a little later why bringing this back is both good for the climate and ecology, but also one of the best antidotes to prevent chronic diseases and also bring the missing pieces that are there in the food chain, food system at this moment. So before we understand nutrition and health, we have to understand our food system. And these are the big challenges the world faces at this time. The hunger needs, the excess calorie burden from refined foods that's increasing preventable chronic diseases. And we have to address these issues with climate change happening, as well as better solutions to the critical metabolic antidotes, especially a more wider range of fruits and vegetables, and more so from our local food systems. Now, some of our traditional vegetables, all are very critical. So with this in mind, if you look at our food today globally, it is really a broken food system. While we look at food as a carbon assimilation, photosynthetic, carbon being hydrated. So that's what plants do. It's the solar energy that splits water, and within the split water, we assimilate the carbon, and we get the primary macromolecule carbohydrate, carbon being hydrated, carbohydrate. So that's where the first energy from the sunlight is held in a chemical form. And from the carbohydrate, we restructure it and make lipids, which is a simple reconstitution into a triacyl glycerol structure like form, which is also required for many energy to structure and many other needs of the human body. All these macronutrients are critical. It's only when they're excess that's a problem. And the third is we have the nitrogen in the environment, and through many metabolic interconversions and algorithms of the metabolic biology, we make amino acids from the carbon chain, and from the amino acids, we make protein. And so that is the three major macronutrients that we see in food, which is carbohydrate, lipids, proteins. And then we have cofactors like minerals and vitamin. And if you go to any food store, you'll see those are the micronutrient, and of course, in a water environment. So that's all we have termed as food as. But we don't realize, and in many ways, ancient Indian traditions have always said, food assimilated is important, but it's really the breathing that's critical. It's the oxygen that we breathe through our nose. That really is the critical control to get the energy that the sun has allowed us to capture in the carbon form through plants. Or then we eat meats where the plant is fed to, chicken or make eggs, and then we consume that. But it's the oxygen, the breath, that allows us to convert it efficiently. And when we have too much carbohydrate, too much lipids, then the coupling to the oxygen metabolism starts breaking down. And this is where all the major diseases are occurring, starting with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, breakdown in immunity. It starts with the oxygen function breaking down. But plants are so elegant that they have these protective mechanisms against the oxygen function. And I will rationalize this how. When did oxygen function came to the planet? It came much later when plants developed, algae and then plants. And it's on the foundations of this, the oxygen eukaryotic biology, including human beings, evolved. And therefore, in our food system, we stripped away the whole food profiles and the protective compound that the plants had to counter the balance, the bad reactions of oxygen. So plants are elegant because they have a lot of feedback loops to counter the negative effects of oxygen. But in our food system now, we strip that away, and also we eat low amounts of fruits and vegetables and beans that also have these whole food protective elements against the oxygen malfunction. So one of the biggest challenges we face is a low diversity of food, where these protective elements in the food are removed, so that when we eat a high macronutrient diet like super high carbohydrates, we have lost that protection. So that needs to be corrected, and that's easy to correct, especially from our local food system. Another important element that has broken down in our food system is our higher oxygen dependent eukaryotes. We came from ancient anaerobic world, meaning Earth didn't start with oxygen. Earth is now 4.8 billion years, and our sun has a life of 8 billion. So we are about middle of it. So in this 4.8 billion years, early life was anaerobic, meaning microbial life. And much later, the algal and eukaryotic life emerged. But interestingly, this ancient microbiome is still part of us in the gut, in the soil, in the animals. So every part of higher eukaryotic or oxygen dependent life still depends on this ancient microbiome. And in our food, it is the fiber that feeds this good microbiome. And when we take too much of super high carbohydrates and other macronutrients, and do not take the microbiome supporting foods that are there in fruits and vegetables and beans, then we have removed the second layer of protection that overall supports us. Our body has nearly 1.5 kilograms or 2 kilograms of good microbiome, the beneficial microbiome, which if we feed too much of the oxygen corrosion type carbohydrates, then it sort of favors the not so good bacteria. It must favor the more anaerobic ancient bacteria, not the oxygen dependent bacteria, which are much more fastidious and more negative. And therefore, the whole food profile not only protects us against the oxygen malfunction, but also supports the microbiome that is so critical. And that's so critical when we take more fruits and vegetable and high fiber diet. Both oxygen protection is enhanced, and also microbiome support is enhanced. So this whole food profile for oxygen protection and microbiome enhancement is the critical missing piece. And many of our local foods and food diversity can provide us this. So as we address these challenges, we need to correct this. So we need a more systems approach based on how Earth developed and the Earth's biology developed, and using a more systems logic of the metabolism that controls the Earth's biology. Based on that, we need to build both climate resilient food crops for food security, but also that contributes to our nutrition and health. So addressing these three elements, having whole foods to protect against oxygen malfunction, and not eating too much of refined carbohydrates, and coupling it with good exercise, which improves breath functions and overall metabolism, yoga, meditation, all of these are very good as we fine-tune our oxygen biology along with the whole food profiles. And now you can see how metabolism is all connected, and it's connected through our oxygen function and our ancient microbiome function, which needs to be supported. So this microbiome starts from our mother when we are born, and then as we sort of develop from first breastfeeding and then diet, as the diet is provided, the microbiome has many layers to sort of enrich the immunity of the child. And then as we go adult, this microbiome provides us a major facet of immunity, particularly innate immunity. So this microbiome with oxygen protection is the foundation of a broader level of immunity, not just B cell, T cell type immunity, which is the vaccine is based on that, but we also have adaptive immunity and also innate immunity. Food is critical for that. The microbiome is critical for that. And the oxygen protecting compounds are critical for that. So the more wider fruit, plant-based diet and wider diversity is going to help us. And therefore, our food system needs to be integrated with a new vision all the way from soil health to human health based on correcting these deficiencies. So we need the systems logic based on redox protection and the whole food profile to support our microbiome. So with this, now we can understand why our nutrition and health is a failure. Because if you look at the Earth's common metabolic control points as the Earth developed, especially last 3 billion years, we started with the ancient prokaryotic anaerobic world. And then later higher organisms emerged, and particularly the eukaryotic life emerged. So as the eukaryotic oxygen-dependent life and they interacted, these two components of oxygen protection and microbiome support is important because we do not live alone. We live in the community of our microbial system. So by understanding this community of microbial system and how they're connected to our overall Earth's metabolism and the Earth's algorithms for metabolism, which is carbon, water, nitrogen, oxygen. So these are the 4 elements, 3 gases and a liquid. So within this framework, we assemble the life that we see. And within that, we need to see how our food systems emerge, and those interactions shape our nutrition and health. So that is the take-home message, is we need to bring this metabolic framework of the Earth's life into our everyday food. And that's not some new science. Our ancient ancestors, whether it's in Ayurveda, whether it's in other traditions of the world, we learn to live from our local food system and local ecology and local adaptation. And those elements came, and those elements better help us to balance these common control point and the combinatorial elements of the food that we need. We need a whole food system and a diversity of that food system from our local ecology. Local bende or local, string beans. And, many of them, they adapted to our local system. Our ancestors adapted to that. So they provide us the microbiome, and they provide us the protection against the oxygen malfunction when we eat too much of carbohydrates. And the body's first defense against too much carbohydrate is to convert it to lipids. So when we have both carbohydrate and lipid imbalance, then all the oxidative burdens increase, inflammation emerges, and it starts moving to type 2 diabetes and worsening of the diabetes, then cardiovascular failure, autoimmune diseases, arthritis. And so it starts progressing, or certain cells malform or grow uncontrollably. We call it cancer. So from that breakdown, from the carbon and oxygen imbalance, it starts progressing as we age. So that is the modern world we live in. And that's also foundation to our immunity, because when we have too much carbohydrate and imbalanced food, The immune cells that gives us the three layers of immunity: innate immunity, non-adaptive immunity, and adaptive immunity. Even those cells are burdened with the high carbohydrate, and they can go towards inflammatory type of response that then reduces the efficiency to fight invaders or better protect us. So you can see how the food system needs to be corrected, and that forms the foundation. So one of the important systems platform for us to improve our food system is at every level, all the way from soil health to plant health to ecosystem health and our human health. We need to have the microbiome, the ancient microbiome, as a part of us. And that is an important take-home message. Our food that we eat need to not only nourish ourselves, but they need to nourish more number of beneficial microbiome that is with us. They may be 1 or 2 kilograms, but in numbers they are much more than our own cells. They needs to be nourished, and they can be only nourished by a wide diversity of plant foods and vegetables and fruits and our fermented foods. All of these innovations of our ancestors should be brought back because it makes metabolic sense. And so if you see how these microbiome and the food that we serve the microbiome is important for overall metabolism, our immunity, and our chronic disease management like diabetes, which is preventable and which can, if not prevented, it can go towards cardiovascular disease and other diseases. And therefore, this improved health needs both a very diverse diet, rich in fruits and vegetables and beans and legumes, but they not only need to feed our metabolic balance, but also need to support the microbiome that feed our metabolic balance. More of the fermented foods, more of the fiber that feeds the fermented foods. So that is the foundation to this diet improved as we move it towards the food system corrections towards better nutrition and health. And therefore, if you see higher organism who came much later after the anaerobic world is after the algae started releasing oxygen. And so this release resulted ultimately in mitochondrial-based life, where oxygen became the key organelle to get energy from the sun via the carbon assimilation. So plants very elegantly capture this solar energy, the photons, as the water is split, and they assimilate the carbon, and you get lipids, and then you put the nitrogen, you get amino acids. But the energy that from the captured carbon skeletons is generated through the mitochondria. At the same time, this mitochondria is coupled to what we call the pentose phosphate pathway. So one generates the energy, but the pentose phosphate pathway is the other critical which balances the oxygen function and then gives us all the protections that are needed, antioxidant protection, making DNA, making other enzymes, critical enzymes. So anabolism, meaning new synthesis, wound healing, better immunity, they all come from the pentose phosphate pathway. So when we eat our diet, we cannot let the mitochondria go bad because mitochondria can leak oxygen, electrons, and then cause like corrosive reactions. So when we eat too much carbohydrate that can't be balanced with the pentose phosphate pathway, then we don't get the protective balance or the redox protection. So that's when the corrosive mitochondrial reaction starts breaking down enzymes at critical cellular levels. And when they break down, you can have inflammation breakdown, you can have tumor suppressor genes breakdown. So you can have many cell layers starting to break down, which then ends up in the specific disease that the doctors say you have. You can have cardio-obstructive pulmonary disease, cancers, or diabetic breakdown. So they all happen when this oxygen in the cellular function starts to leak the free radicals. But in nature, if we eat good food and support the pentose phosphate pathway, the cytosolic pathway, then you get all the countermeasures. So we can look to our own cells to build the countermeasures, but also have the microbiome and the diverse food to help us with this paradox of oxygen. Oxygen, as you know, is in the outer shell, has 6 electrons. So in the mitochondria, in the last step where it forms water, that is where the reactions go bad, where the outer shell cannot be balanced with 2 more electrons. Sometimes it has 7, sometimes 9. So these are the free radicals. So they become super reactive. So they need to be balanced. And the way you balance it is by the diet, wider diet, the fiber and the microbiome and the pentose phosphate pathway, which then corrects all the bad reactions that's coming from the mitochondria. So this balance is the basis of the dietary health management at the metabolic level. So the simple solution is increase your fruits and vegetables into a higher number of servings and balance out your carbohydrate to much lower levels, especially the refined carbohydrates that we have a tendency to eat with low exercise. They cannot be metabolized properly. So that is a very simple take-home message, but it has sound foundations in the metabolism, and the best way to capture them is also depend on our traditional and local food system, which we have developed for centuries and centuries in our own ecology. So if you look closely, food has profiles that's more than carbohydrates, lipids, vitamins, minerals, and water, which is what you see in a food label. We also need to fine-tune the oxygen biology, what we breathe. So fine-tuning the breath at the level of the mitochondria, and especially understanding plants as they came from the ocean to the land about 500 million years ago. So this whole carbon burden needs to be balanced with the mitochondria being protected. So this protective phytochemicals and fiber is the very key combinations that we need to get from plant foods, and also how we grow our animal foods needs to be from this platform. Say you grow a chicken or make an egg, they need to have also the same balance as we try to get nutrition from animal sources. And so this is the key foundation on which diet needs to be addressed, meaning we need to correct the oxygen paradox. We only look at the carbon fixation, but we forgot all the major diseases are coming from the breakdown of the mitochondrial function and cytosolic pentose phosphate pathway. So if you look at the top disease in our society globally, it starts with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, arthritis, cognition. As we age, the oxidation worsens. So if we can reconstitute our food with a wider array of fruits and vegetables, and especially from our local ecology where it's best adapted, and then you can balance the carbohydrate and lipids and other food that we tend to eat from our modern diet. And so this is not big logic. This logic is there in nature. If you look at plants, every aspect of plant development has a redox balance. It has redox balance at 2 levels. One is their reproductive function, and second is their stress function. So if you look at their reproductive and stress function, which is represented as antioxidant response, signals for development, stress response against biotic stressors, seed vigor, many of the plant metabolic functions pull out a lot of these secondary compounds that are protective and provide the redox balance, but also they feed the good bacteria. They interact with the beneficial bacteria. They also grow with the good bacteria. So they come together and they help the plant to adapt in this open nature. So this adapted plant, we now have compiled it in legumes. For example, Lamiaceae is a Tulsi family, Pudina. It has so many good compounds that we eat in chutney or in different ways, right? So, and every culture has developed some species within that mint family or the Lamiaceae family. Legumes, our beans and fruits and vegetables. So all these are rich in these protective compounds that we need to bring into everyday food. Even our cereals are rich in it, but if we sort of polish it, we lose it. We lose the fiber and we lose the protective compound. So, and then we have bread, rice, which is very, white rice. So we don't eat boiled rice, and we don't eat, highland rice, which is very rich in this. We don't eat parboiled rice, which is rich in these protective compounds. Instead of that, we go and eat very highly refined rice, right? So we need to bring all these protective elements, but also get a better balance of beans and legumes. Indian diet traditionally was very well balanced between legumes and cereals. If you look at our idli, dosa, it's 1-to-2 ratio, 1-to-3 ratio. So there was a good logic why they had that ratio in addition to how we make our dosa and idli, but also the nutritional balance was so profoundly well balanced. But now we have 1-to-10, 1-to-20 ratios. We have big piles of rice and chapati and very low levels of our side components. So we need to not only make our chapati and rice more protective by eating less refined, chapati and less refined rice, but also bring all the other things that come in, spices and herbs and beans and vegetables, and then including turmeric and capsicum and all of these other amazing ingredients that the Indian cuisine has developed for centuries from our history. And so these needs to be brought back because they provide these protective compounds for different function, for antioxidant function. They are also important for anti-diabetic function. They are also important for blood pressure control. They are also important for our cognitive compounds. They come from beans. They are also important for our physiology of reproductive functions. So every facet of our overall metabolism around oxygen function, every cell is built on that, has to have these protective elements, and they come from a plant diet. And so the more plant diets we incorporate and not refine, and more fruits and vegetables and beans we bring into our diet, we bring all these good compounds that we don't have to go and then get it in drugs. We can get it in our everyday food. And that is the summary of through many PhDs, postdocs who have done this work. Plants are a magical system. So they're a critical part of our ecology. They are eukaryotic, but they are autotrophic. They are regulatory systems. They not only assemble the food, but they also have control points to have balance, where the mitochondria protection and the pentose phosphate pathway, they're very well balanced. And the way they are balanced is because the plants have amazing ability to make these secondary compounds that are feedback controlled to not let the uncontrolled reactions. So they balance very well. Only when we breed high carbohydrate cereals, then all the protection breaks down. Then we have to feed them with pesticides and fungicides to protect them, because we have removed all these secondary compounds and made them rich in starch and macronutrients, chemicals, because plants have these self-protective mechanisms, and in their diversity, they're rich in it. They protect themselves, but they also, when we consume them, they provide us the protection, and you can see why. The important gate between the mitochondrial function, which is part of every higher organism, including plants, and the anabolic pentose phosphate, they are balanced. And the simple message is, the more fruits and vegetables, more diverse diet, more beans you eat, this metabolic balance that the plant can do, we can do, but we eat it. But the plants produces it on their own. So how we grow our plants, how we breed our plants has to change to correct for this oxygen and microbiome protection, which we then can bring into our diet. And we can bring into our diet even if we eat animal foods. We grow them with better plant logic. So with that, I will give you an example of how we are applying this to one of the major diseases that are affecting the world, which may be the reason for hyperinflammation and may even contribute to inflammation that leads to immunity challenges and other challenges. Type 2 diabetes is the fastest growing non-communicable preventable chronic disease. 90% of the diabetics are preventable and is adult onset, meaning we create the problem for ourselves. They're not like type 1 where they don't have the pancreatic function well, so they need insulin injection all their life. So that's more genetic. But majority of the diabetics type 2 is adult onset. So solution requires a dietary challenge with exercise, and diet is very central. And unfortunately, this is very old data. Now, by 2030, we'll have 600 million people nearly 7 to 8% of the global population. In the US now, it's about 11%, and India is one of the fastest growing diabetes countries in the world. And so it's a global problem because it's from diabetes, all other breakdowns happen. The inflammation breakdown, immunity breakdown, cardiovascular breakdown, they all start with the metabolic breakdown in carbon metabolism. But the solution is very good, simple. Eat more fruits and vegetables. And why? Because the protective compounds that the plants have developed from bendy and leaves and amaranthus, they all have these enzymes that we try to get from drugs. So when we consume them, they not only bulk and give the fiber to support our microbiome, but those combination of reactions give the antidote for slowing down the glycemic load, the glucose that then burdens the insulin. So before it burdens the insulin and demands the insulin to be made from the pancreas, we can slow them down. By just eating more fiber, you have less available to be going into glucose. And further, if you eat more plant compounds, plant foods, you have many drug-like moieties within those foods to slow them down. So you don't need to get them from drugs. You can get them from wide array of plant foods. And that is what my master's and PhD students do. As they come from different parts of the world, they study their local foods to get these inhibitors that are there naturally in foods. It's there even in our rice, if you eat highland rice or parboiled rice in some lower levels. But when we strip them and eat more white rice and super high starch type rice, then we lose those protection that can then increase the glucose load very suddenly. And then when we have a high sugar diet or high rich diet that we see from high carbohydrate, then the glycemic load goes up. We have to depend on the pancreas to make insulin to sort of manage it. But then it's like a car. You're running a car that should be running for 100 years, and you're just running it in 10 years by using this glucose fuel badly, and allowing it to go sort of uncontrollably, unmanaged. And then any glucose that's not absorbed and can't be managed, liver tries to convert them into fat. But after some time, the fatty liver emerges, and they also contribute to the oxidative breakdown. So it comes from both fat and from uncontrollable glucose and sugar metabolism. So by just eating a lot of fruits and vegetables, many of these countermeasures that plants have developed for their own reproductive and stress metabolism, we can use them. And therefore, for many of these primary diseases that we are now facing, glucose control, beta cell function, oxidative breakdown, where you have eye issues, blood pressure issues, wound healing issues, foot healing issues, and then you can't control the lipids. So then you start taking drugs for each of them, metformin, TDZ type. And then when you have macrovascular wound healing problem, then you have another whole layer. So many of the doctors are not trained to understand this. They have some general nutrition course, maybe for a few hours, and they don't understand what is happening at the metabolic level. And therefore, as our human current population eats a lot of inexpensive refined calories, in India, we see it as chapati and rice as we progress, and ultimately eye problem, kidney problem, and also wound healing problem. And so here in the US, we have this problem very serious among our indigenous population. Globally, there are 400 indigenous. These are people who have been in their own locality for longer than us. Like in India, Todas in the Nilgiris and many of our tribal communities, they've been longer in India than others who came later from Africa or others. So even here, like in Australia, Aborigines came 60, 70,000 years ago. Or here in North America, the native people are supposed to have come from 13, 15,000 years ago. So these people, as other migrants came into their land, their traditional food got displaced. And through colonialism, many models, we won't argue about that. But what is tragedy is they, instead of their own local traditional food from which they were healthy, they suddenly got this high carbohydrate diet. And you can see this in indigenous populations all over the world. And so here in North America, indigenous people, Native Americans, they have average lifespan of 57 years. And their higher probability of getting diabetes and going towards all these breakdowns. So even in this COVID burden, they are facing higher exposure to COVID and breakdown of their immunity. So it is, so all the poor community like African American, Latin Americans who have higher burden of these high calorie diets, they are burdened more with the immunity breakdown. So 60-70% of the COVID cases here are among these populations. The urban, calorie dense diets, and indigenous communities, well before COVID, are facing the highest level of diabetes, highest level of cardiovascular problems, highest level of all the complications like wound healing, foot amputations, eye issues. So if you look at that, they have a higher rates of everything, and they have higher rates. It starts all the way from the child, from gestational stage and to the child. So that means we are predisposing from the womb itself the high carbohydrate propensity of the child. So as they grow into adult, they also move towards that burden. So that's what may be happening even in India as we move into this high carbohydrate diabetic situation. Our mothers and us, we may be predisposing our children to long-term propensity of these diseases because our womb, where the child develops, is nourished with the same improper diet that we take. And therefore, it is a consequence across metabolism and stages of life. And therefore, if we go back, for example, the indigenous food community in North America, they had a beautiful concept of growing plants. They grew colored corn, colored beans, and squashes in one system called Three Sisters. So these Three Sisters ecology, if you go study deeply, they have high fiber, high protective, all those protections that I just told you about, they're rich in that. And then we start measuring the anti-diabetic compounds and anti-blood pressure compounds, they're rich in that. So if they just go back to this traditional Three Sister logic that they had built for over 10,000 years, many of those solutions, they can be, these can be solutions to them. Same in each of our local ecology, we have such system. And here is an example of one. And therefore, we are encouraging our native people here in North Dakota. We have many such communities. And so we are developing the garden based on these system. And so using this Three Sister system, we are trying to increase all his antihypertensive and related compounds. So we can see the same challenges across other parts of the world. And here is a student from Peru. She studied the Andean foods and the value of these Andean foods and their anti-diabetic protections. And so similarly, we are looking at Indian food systems, how the beans, the legumes can be a rich source of these compounds. And so if you see many of these traditional crops from different parts of the world, there are high levels of these protective compounds that's not there in our current food system. The antioxidant function, anti-diabetic function. And so as we can bring these traditional, local, indigenous food and start building them as a critical part of our food system, we can have a better nutrition and health platform. And so we are now working on this and building these designs. So for example, we are building this Three Sister concept design for our indigenous community here in North America, particularly in the Great Plains and North Dakota. And likewise, we are, through my different students, we are helping them with their local food in the Andes or in other parts of the world, in Asia. Here's a good example where high soluble phenol is found in many of these traditional squashes or pumpkins. And so they're an important part of different dishes that they have. Like in India, also a lot of pumpkins in there in our curries, in different foods that we create. Like for example, here we have high anti-diabetic function in a squash that one of my students' grandfather had that was hidden away. And so we germinated that and started measuring the anti-diabetic compounds. They're very high in this. So now we bring back these traditional food into our food system to give better countermeasures. Likewise, we are seeing how these traditional foods can be integrated into modern processing, like we have got microwave and many different cooking strategies, and whether those anti-diabetic factors still are retained and how much are they retained. So there's nothing wrong in having modern technology and convenience of it, but those need to be integrated with this whole food concept and protecting these oxygen malfunctioning and microbiome protecting compounds. So with that, we start to redesign our food system and also align it with modern technology. And here is another good example. See, this is the traditional rice, like the white rice that we eat. But here in North America, we have what's called wild rice that grows along the rivers. And if you look at some of those lake rices, they're very high in these antioxidant, anti-diabetic compounds. And you can just see by how they look. And so we are encouraging them to bring them back into our food, into their food system rather than dependent on these high-yielding varieties which don't have those protective compounds. So likewise, a lot of the root vegetable, like Native Americans here, have a lot of these parsnip and rutabaga. They're very rich in oligosaccharide that protect our good bacteria. Likewise, many of these root vegetables like sweet potato, they are very rich in some of the berries, wild rice, colored corn. They are very high in these protective compounds. So we are looking at from a child and maternal health point of view and designing this new indigenous baby food design based on their traditional food system. So that we bring these protective elements both at the mother's level as well as at the child level, right from the womb all the way to the birth to onward into every stage of life. So bringing this back, we feel that we give a better nutrition and health foundation to the child. And so the this adult onset is even managed. So with this kind of logic, we are trying to take this traditional local food system and building it into the modern food structures and addressing the critical nutritional security and health challenges, looking at non-communicable chronic diseases. But what is exciting is many of these crops, they're very hardy, they're very resilient, they have more chance to survive in nature. The reasons they produce these protective compounds is because they can grow in very harsh situations and because they produce these compounds. So many plants that that have protected compounds to withstand extreme weather, they're also good for health. So that is a paradox concept, meaning they are dual function. So plants that are very good in nature can adapt this oxygen function breakdowns in nature. They are the ones we should be eating. So we are building this logic here. And with that, we are building this agriculture production strategy based on this oxygen malfunction and microbiome protecting compounds and building a sustainable traditional food base and diversity of that and bringing all the modern technologies to it. And then from that green, new, climate resilient, ecologically adaptable, we can then build the value added processing, the whole foods, the supplements, even medicines. They all can come from this a green platform that's more climate resilient, where the metabolic biology of the earth is incorporated at every level, from the soil to human health. So with that, we have a very interesting new is where microbiome is very critical for both growing these climate resilient plants, but very interestingly, many of the compounds the plant produce for the climate resilience, they are the ones that are critical for many of our beneficial health to give us better nutrition, better overall nutrition that reduces inflammation, The inflammation is a foundation to immunity breakdown. Inflammation is a foundation to diabetes. Inflammation is the foundation to cardiovascular disease. So every major disease is the first breakdown is the free radical scavenging, leading to inflammatory breakdown. Then the glycemic breakdown, which we see call it type 2 diabetes. And progressively, it goes to coronary disease, cancers, autoimmune disease, which is arthritis, and then cognitive disease, Alzheimer and Parkinson's. So you can see where it comes down. It starts with the oxygen malfunction. So the more protective elements that we get from nature, but they are also what is required for climate resilience. So as we face climate resilience, our food system and diversity has to increase, especially in our local environment. And we have to build this dual function, microbiome supporting, oxygen protecting food system. So with this, we have a microbiome and redox biology like an open platform. So we take this platform around the world like an open source. And so we want every community on the planet, wherever they are living, in the tropics to temperate or wherever, whichever ecology they are living in, to develop this plant to human health platform based on sound foundation of our ecology and our food system. So this discovery engine, which is a very systems-based engine, and it's built on our traditional food. So we should be eating more of our idli and dosa and multi-grain idlis, and because we bring all of those protective elements into one platform, into one protective platform that can be rationalized by the metabolic biology. And so the simple message is eat more fruits and vegetables, more fermented food, more diverse foods, more local foods. So with that, it's good for our ecology and good for our food system improvement. And more importantly, it's good for our nutrition, but more importantly, it does not give us these diseases we are facing globally. And particularly in India, we are facing a big diabetes burden. And now you can see exposure in the COVID. For example, in COVID, there are many countries like Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos and even Sri Lanka. They have 1 death per million, less than 1 death per million. And you can see if we go closely and look at their diet, they have a very diverse diet, many of the logic that I just told you about. And so that diet logic has to be brought into the picture. Then you have societies like Japan and Korea, which are modern, but yet they have deaths between 1 to 10 per million. And then you have India and a few countries in the South Asia, which are moving between 50 deaths to 100 deaths, like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. We are in that level. And then you go to the Middle East, West Asia, we are in the 50 to 150 deaths per million. And suddenly you jump to Europe and North America, South America. So those deaths shoot up to 1,000, 750 to 1,000 per million. And so if you see where the system is breaking down, a lot of it is the food breakdown. Why are some communities even without vaccine? Of course, they are much more respectful of masking and few other, but still, very poor countries like Laos and Cambodia, they still have less than 1 death per million. Sri Lanka has less than 1 death per million. So this foundation in food has a foundation in the immunity and the protection that they're getting. So this needs to be studied very closely. And there are enough countries to study this. A good example here in the Americas is Haiti versus Dominican Republic. They're one island split into half with the same population. But Haiti has only 30 deaths per million. But Dominican Republic has 1,000 deaths per million. They live in high, dense, refined food platform, urban environments. Haiti, very poor, but yet they live in a lot of rural environments and eat a wider diet. Many fitting into this microbiome redox biology logic. Of course, they're poor and some of the masking, many issues are challenged, but yet they have basic protection compared to just their neighbors in the same island that's divided by half and with the same population, about 10 million each population. So there are enough examples to show that there is a food system collapse that may have contributed to how we are responding to immunity breakdown, especially in this COVID climate that we are facing. And India, as we see in the urban environment, we are facing this more. Maharashtra and a few of the urban environments, the burdens are much higher. And so we need to study this closely and look at this role. Right now, there's no full proof to say that this is the reason, but there is a reason that the 3 layers of immunity has a critical food imbalance that needs to be likely corrected. And many communities in the world are showing us that why they survive better than others without vaccine. So this is my last slide. We need a much more of our ancient microbiome, which comes through fermented foods and the redox protection whole food approach. So using this systems approach, we can better build back our ecology and our local food system. And this is the foundation to build a healthy food. And this is the foundation for nutrition and health. And so all the solutions that you need to live healthy and well is there in your local environment. It is there in your local foods. It is there in your grandmother's food. They are there. We just need to rationalize them with modern logic and see that we move away from these super calorie foods into a more diversified, high plant-based food. And there's nothing wrong. I'm not advocating meat eating. I also eat a little chicken and egg and here and there. But it is with this logic that we need to sort of reinvent this. But it is the logic of our ancestors. But we now have more understanding of the biochemistry and of the ecology. And suddenly we are seeing all these breakdown, climate change and pandemics coming. And so there are solutions there in Mother Earth. So we just have to go back to Mother Earth and see how Mother Earth's balance has emerged. What is the biochemistry of that Mother Earth? And how are plants critical? How is plant linked to sun? And how the sun's energy is coming into the chemical and the biochemical and the overall platform. How are the protections emerged? And so if you understand that, many of the ideas are already there in our food system, and our ancestors already had some idea about this already, and they have codified it in certain structures. Now we can improve on this with more understanding of modern biochemistry. So with that, I had just so many slides to convey my message, and I hope that was useful, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have.
Yeah. Sir, really wonderful. Sir, your knowledge in the field of nutrition and health, it has really enlightened us, all of us, in different angles. And I'm sure the valuable insights of today's lecture have given, really it's given us a new perspective that one should adopt in day-to-day life. So really wonderful. So you really enlightened us in different angles about the health and nutrition aspect. Now I request all the participants, you have to fill the feedback form. Link will be placed in the chat box so that you can fill up immediately after the vote of thanks. So before that, now I request we have received a few questions, but you have already answered for all those questions. So no need of taking up now. So now I request Dr. Haridas Kulur, Assistant Director of Physical Education, Joint Organizing Secretary, All India Inter-University Gold Medalist in Powerlifting, to propose vote of thanks. Over to Haridas Kulur.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We are happy to say that the international webinar on nutrition and health has concluded with a grand success. It is my pleasant duty to thank all who have supported us to conduct this webinar successfully. First of all, I thank the chief patron of this webinar, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Mangalore University, Professor Subramanya Yadapaditaya, for his valuable guidance and wholehearted support to organize this international webinar. Today's resource person, Dr. Kalidas Shetty, who have enlightened us on nutrition and health. Sir, on behalf of Mangalore University and Department of Physical Education, I extend heartfelt thanks to you, Dr. Kalidas Shetty, sir. We extend our heartfelt thanks to Mr. Raju Mugavira, KS, Registrar of University, Syndicate members of Mangalore University, Registrar Evaluation, Professor P.L. Dharma, and Finance Officer, Professor Narayan, for their valuable support and guidance. Heartfelt thanks to Commissioner of Kendriya Vidyalaya Sangathan, Dr. K.N. Chidambara Murthy, Principal Scientist, CR Laboratory, Ramaya Medical College, Bangalore, Professor Bindu S., Head, Department of Biotechnology, MS Ramaya Medical College, Miss Rupati, Physical Education Director, Besant Women's College, Bangalore, Mr. Sukumar, Physical Education Director, Purnapradnya College, Udupi, Mr. Ratish, Mr. Binu, Mr. Surya, and Mr. Kushwa, Sports Officers of Kendriya Vidyalaya Sangathan, Bangalore, for their valuable support and wholehearted support for the success of this webinar. I extend sincere thanks to my colleagues in the department, Mr. Shaban, technical person, Mr. Ramesh Ichan, Joint Organizing Secretary of this webinar, for their wholehearted support for the success of this webinar. Dr. Kishore Kumar CK, Director of Physical Education and Organizing Secretary of this webinar, under his direction, the international webinar has been organized with grand success. Thank you very much, sir.
Welcome.
Definitely, we remember the work done by the different persons in a large way been responsible for the success of this webinar. I extend heartfelt thanks to all of them. I extend my special thanks to all the participants of this webinar and who have supported directly and indirectly to conduct this webinar with a grand success. Thank you one and all. Over to Director.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Haridas Kulur. Once again, I take this opportunity to thank each and everyone for their kind help in the successful organization of this international webinar. Friends, on the 4th November 2020, we have decided to conduct one more international webinar on physical training and rehabilitation. Our speaker will be Dr. Anand Shetty from USA, sir, from your place only. I request all of you to register for the said webinar and make use of it. Thank you and say good night, all of you. So thank you very much for your presence on this occasion. Thank you very much. So thank you all. I request all the participants to kindly fill up the feedback form that will be placed in the chat box, already placed in the chat box, and you will receive a certificate only after sending this feedback form. So thank you very much. And
Excellent webinar, Kishore sir. We are really thankful to Mangalore University